This podcast is brought to you by Free Buddhist Audio, the Dharma for your life. Our work is funded entirely by donations from our generous listeners. If you would like to help us keep this free, make a contribution at freebuddhistaudio.com/donate. Thank you, and happy listening.
I called this talk Bhante and the Bodhisattva Spirit. So I came along to the movement. It was called the Friends of the Western Buddhist Order in those days, in the spring of 1979. And the Bodhisattva idea was very much in the air then, and it was a focus of many talks and pujas. It was what everyone was just talking about. There was a Dharmacharani called Paramini. I don't know, you might have go talk some Free Buddhist Audio. Every talk she would talk about the Bodhisattva idea, or the Bodhicitta was arising, and the context we were creating for the Bodhicitta. So it was very real. It was like we were really trying to sort of going for it in a certain sort of way. And within, all the talk about the Bodhisattva ideals, I think for myself, I think to many of us, it was especially inspiring to hear Bhante's statement that the Bodhicitta was most likely to arise within a collective context, a spiritual community, a community of people sharing very strong common values, maybe not necessarily living together, but at least mentally or physically sharing and heartfelt common values, practices and ideals. And that I think that was very encouraging, that anyway, the task of creating the conditions for the arising of the Bodhicitta was something we could share. It wasn't something we sort of had to work out on our own. So we could share that together. Plus, it gave us a task to do, there was quite clear things to do. And all of us very young in our 20s and sort of full of energy, we needed something to do. So it channeled our energies, and it was something that wasn't just personal and individual. It was sort of something a bit beyond us. So that was all more inspiring and healthy, really. In any case, it was, as we all know, it's not too much to do on your own. You can't really consider sort of creating conditions for the arising of the Bodhicitta on your own. And it was like an adventure to embark on with others. So the task, when it sort of choked down into our practice, the task was, on the one hand, to develop ourselves as individuals, as much as we could develop the conditions within ourselves for wisdom and compassion to arise. And on the other hand, open up to the reality of other people. Yes, other people also existed, which can take quite a bit of seeing through. We're all naturally self-centered, and it's very, very hard to get out of the mindset that we are the center of the universe. It takes a lot of doing. And so the accent of on deep and honest and open and truthful communication was very, very strong, and on friendship taken on as a practice to go beyond ourselves, and teamwork that brought people very strongly together. So it wasn't about being nice and having lovely communications, but actually having as possible as real a communication as possible, so that we actually sort of started rubbing off our sharp edges. Bhante used to liken the context he was trying to set up with us as like these machines where they put in these pebbles which have got sharp edges, and they sort of tumble around, hit against each other, but you get these beautiful, lovely, shiny pebbles that come out the other end. The process did not so nice for the pebbles, probably. And despite being a generation older than most, if not all of us, maybe 2 generations older than some of us, Bhante very much contributed the energy and the spark and the willingness to communicate across barriers, the dedication and the vision. A very, very direct communicator. And also he had this great feeling and gift for friendship, which he sort of really sparked off with people. He had the feeling for community, which is amazing considering he began so much on his own. As a Buddhist, he was so isolated, really. So quite soon after I came along to my first beginners class, Bhante was giving a series of lectures called what was on the Vimalakirti Nidesha Sutra, which is part of the Mitra study course. Those lectures are the Inconceivable Emancipation, I think it's called. So I'd only been coming on a few months, and I came along to these lectures. They are, you could say, all about the work of the Bodhisattva who is trying to create the Buddha field, the Buddha land. And the Buddha land is a place where it is easy to catch the spirit of the Dharma, to practice the Dharma, to hear the Dharma, to be part of the Sangha. So that was what, in a way, that's what the lectures were all about. So I hardly understood a word, unfortunately, because being a complete beginner, it sort of was just going like right above my head. I remember the atmosphere was very electric, and I do remember a few bits and pieces in it, but it was sort of later on that I sort of really came to appreciate them. I've heard those lectures over and over again, and I find them like a sort of spiritual nourishment almost. It's like food and drink to me, these lecture series. And I think looking back at those lectures, with those lectures, Bhante was sharing what he was trying to do, what he was really doing in creating a Buddhist movement. And I think we get a strong idea of his vision for Sangha as well, how he understands the Bodhisattva ideal. I thought I'd quote a little bit from the lecture, Building the Buddha Land, which is perhaps I've got two favourite lectures of all time, and that's one of them, and the other one is about Sangha of Astris. Building the Buddha Land. So he says the Buddha Land has to be a joint creation. It has to be built by a number of people, bodhisattvas and would-be bodhisattvas working together. One of them may be more advanced than the others, may have more vision, but all must be inspired by the same ideal, the ideal of supreme perfect enlightenment for the benefit of all beings. They all therefore follow the Bodhisattva Path, follow it for thousands of lives, and follow it together. This is a truly wonderful conception, the whole spiritual community being reborn together, as a spiritual community living and working together, helping one another life after life until the Buddha land is established. That's his amazing vision of us being reborn, working together for the benefit of all beings, really, in whatever way we can. So how do we do that? So Bhante goes on to say, you cannot really help yourself without helping others, and you cannot really help others without helping yourself. If you develop emotional positivity, imagination, and insight within yourself, that has its effect on others. And if you work for others, give to others, sacrifice yourself for them, that has its effect on you. So we cannot really separate helping ourselves from helping others, certainly not in the spiritual sphere. The Bodhisattva ideal and the Arahant ideal are inseparable. So that's what we've been hearing already so far on the retreat. And that's the very, very practical, down-to-earth reason behind it all, really. It's as human beings, as we know from even the first day on this retreat, we're not separate beings. We affect each other the whole time. He said, there's a couple of lovely, very short quotes. Mutual helpfulness in leading a spiritual life, such is the foundation of the Buddha land. Mutual helpfulness in leading a spiritual life, such is the foundation of the Buddha land. The Buddha land is built by the Bodhisattvas' united but individual practice of the Dharma. So in a way, the task is very sort of clear, isn't it? That to do with just sort of working on ourselves and keeping the channels open with each other as much as we can. So this is all very inspiring to us and to people actively, physically trying to create new centres and retreat centres and teams and contexts where people could come together and practice together. And it's not an easy thing to do at all. And especially in those days in the movement, everybody was in their 20s and 30s, very sort of high-spirited and not very spiritually evolved, immature. Nobody really been a Buddhist longer than about 10 years or 15 years. So that's how, that was the beginning of the movement. We sort of tend to forget where it sort of came from, but it came from a lot of people who didn't really know what they were doing. And there could be a lot of conflict as well, different personalities, different opinions on things, some strong personalities, some strong leaders who happen to be doing the same project. you can imagine how that would be. And my own experience in 1986 when I came to Taraloka, and we were sort of very much building Taraloka almost from scratch, with being the women's retreat centre in the UK in the 80s. And I remember moving there, and there's already been a small team established, and people didn't see eye to eye personally. And I remember going there, and they all went to their rooms in the evening. I thought, oh gosh, what's going on? People weren't really talking to each other very much. But actually, then we had a meeting to discuss the retreat centre, and people's harmony and the unity of their vision was absolutely amazing. It was just completely flawless. There was no, people's heart was, that was what the connection was. That was what the common factor was. A very, very strong harmony around what we were doing and the vision for what you were doing. And that's what kept it all together. And the relationships worked their way out as time went on. So sometimes it was more comfortable than others, really. I thought what I'd like to do is tell a bit of Bhante's story, and obviously I can't really say how I think, what I think is his inspiration was in the Bodhisattva spirit or the Bodhisattva ideal, but I'm just sort of picking some things up from his writings and maybe sort of interpreting a few things. I can't obviously speak for him, that we have got quite a bit of his writing and his histories. But if this basically, they're sort of starting off with, as we know, as a boy, he spent a lot of time being ill in bed, and voraciously read through complete series of encyclopedias from start to finish. And he was obviously, very, very avid for knowledge, and he was obviously searching for something as well, wasn't he? Quite amazing. So he was largely a self-taught person. Hardly ever went to school and didn't get much out of school. Left school early, actually, because he didn't particularly enjoy school. But he was really reading widely philosophy and religion, and I think he'd almost decided he was a Buddhist quite early on. But then he found in a second-hand bookshop. He used to haunt second-hand bookshops from the early teens. He found a copy of the Diamond Sutra, which is this very, very elevated, beautiful Mahayana sutra. The Diamond Sutra. He read the Diamond Sutra, and on his first reading, he realized he understood it, and he realized this was what he believed himself and always had believed, and he realized he really was a Buddhist. And he said the insight he felt from reading the Diamond Sutra at 16 was that didn't change. That was always fundamental to his leading of the Dharma life. So he sort of saw the Dharma, or reawoke to the Dharma at that point. And he came across the Bodhisattva ideal in Buddhist texts quite shortly after that. And he says in his memoirs that they really thrilled him. He was thrilled and uplifted by the sublimity of the Bodhisattva ideal when he first met it. But Bhante found the Dharma in England, where I suppose it's before the Second World War. Very, very few Buddhists in Europe, or in America too, I suspect. Very, very few. And there was a Buddhist society, but he did try to find the Buddhists that there were, and some were practicing Buddhists, and others had sort of academic interest in Buddhism, and sort of it was like an interest, or they all sort of talked about it and wrote about it. So he was really struggling to find other Buddhists. He was really longing to find other Buddhists. And I think he felt he was lucky so in the war he got drafted to Sri Lanka, and a place where there was a living spiritual tradition. In Sri Lanka there was a Buddhist tradition, but he was really open to anything and anybody. So he was really searching. And when you read his memoirs, I've just reread the Rainbow Road, which I highly recommend. It's an amazing book. And you just pick up, I'd forgotten actually, the passion with which he was searching, and the openness really to anything. He'd have these endless long conversations with different Hindu mystics and sages, and he learnt to meditate in whatever ways were available then. He met a few Buddhist monks. I think he was more impressed with the Hindus at that point, Theosophists. And I find it very, very moving, his passion and his dedication and his openness to just looking everywhere. Just very, very remarkable. Yeah, because perhaps it's should say that Buddhism had died out in India pretty much at that point. There weren't many Buddhists in India, or just a few in Sri Lanka, pretty much. So I think it's very easy to think of Bhante as he was in his later years. He's been somehow we've been aware of him getting older and sort of maybe about to die, and help. What shall we do? We're very aware of his older age, but we forget that he was just very, very vigorous. Actually, he was a very vigorous man in about the prime of life, really, when he ordained me in 1986. Very, very strong man, sort of energetic. But as a young man, he was very, very energetic and very, very inspired. So yes, he's got himself to somehow by karma or good fortune. At the age of 21, the war ends and he sort of vanishes from the army. As we know, he tears up his passport and chucks his passport away, gives away all his possessions apart from a few books, throws away even his shoes. I find that quite strong, and his wristwatch. And he and a companion who he's met in at somewhere, I forget exactly what it was now. But anyway, they get hold of the sarongs and shirts and they dye them in the yellow mud. That's what the sadhus in India always used to do. And they just go forth. He wants to follow the tradition of the Buddhist monk and just go forth and search and seek. That is quite a story. So after many trials and tribulations, Bhante wants to be ordained as a Buddhist monk, and they eventually do get ordained. Their first ordination. Yes. Yeah. Anyway, it's just very, very striking to. Can't quite imagine doing that myself. That sort of just imagine and there's that lovely story when he goes forth and from this city where there's only one person who really is behind what they're doing. Everyone else said that you're mad to be doing what you're doing, which I probably would have said myself if it was Ori Drishti going forth without any shoes. And I say, you sure you're gonna? Anyway, but someone she's really behind what they're doing and gives them their last breakfast, and then they walk through this archways of rainbows. It's really amazing, actually, down into the plain. But what I wanted to talk about was they meet Jagdish Kashyap, who offers to take Bhante under his wing and teach him logic and Pali. And this is Bhante's first teacher. And Bhante really admires and trusts Jagdish Kashyap. He sounds like he's a very sharp mind, but also a very warm, undemanding sort of character. And yes, this is where I wanted to talk a little bit about Bhante's own search to go beyond the ego. So in our study groups, we've been discussing the issue of how to go beyond or rise above the duality of self and other, this sort of polarization of self and other, to open into a sort of this mysterious state of a lack of self-centeredness or a lack of the self-centeredness, the unfolding heart of the Bodhisattva. So Bhante is very aware of the possibility of going beyond egoistic will and motivation, but he just really doesn't know how to do it. It sort of occupies his mind a lot, and so he's tried. He reads somewhere that a disciple could surrender their will absolutely to the will of the spiritual master, the spiritual superior, and that would be a way of getting rid of the ego, or sort of going beyond the ego. And he decides to do that with his teacher Jagdish Kashyap, and whatever Jagdish says to him to do, he will do it. I find he really does mean that, like in everything. And so again, it's very Bhante's sincerity of his practice is very, very moving, and it's quite amusing too, because Jagdish Kashyap is such an unassuming person and so ungiven to telling people what to do that Bhante has to struggle a bit to find things that Jagdish Kashyap wants him to do. So it's not maybe the crucial situation he was hoping for totally, but actually what happens is that Jagdish Kashyap they goes on a sort of a tour, and they go to Kalimpong, which as we know is the place where Bhante ended up living for quite a while. As far as Bhante knew, they'll be going back to the university in Benares, which is where they go, but Dayanandi decides he's going to leave that university behind, and he says to Bhante, this is what he does say: stay in Kalimpong and work for the good of Buddhism. And he says the local Buddhists will look after him. And Bhante reflects, there was little I could say. The word of the Guru was not to be disobeyed. Bowing my head in acquiescence, I paid my respects in the traditional manner. Kashyapji gave me his blessing and the jeep drove off. As though just to reflect, it is 1950 and Bhante is only 24. And in his memoirs, he says he's never been alone before in his whole life. So that he sort of landed in Kalimpong in this place on his own. But he's sort of quite matter of fact about it. So he makes a life for himself really in Kalimpong, and he revels in the blue skies and the snows of the Himalayas and the bright colours and the various peoples that he meets there. And it is because he stays in Kalimpong at Kashyapji's request that Bhante meets Dada Rinpoche and his other Tibetan teachers, people consciously practicing with the aspiration of the Bodhisattva ideal. So he emerges within a sangha of Buddhist practicing on the Bodhisattva Path. And Bhante says he was very deeply impressed and inspired by many of the Tibetan teachers that he met, and also by the images and the presences of the Buddhas and the Bodhisattvas who he begins to meet as well in the temples and the monasteries in that area. He hasn't actually come across any of that before, hardly either. There's a wonderful description of him seeing an enormous image of Padmasambhava, and he sort of really feels as though he's met Padmasambhava before. It's a very, very strong, very beautiful description of how Padmasambhava then takes such a strong place in Bhante's life, in his being. So Bhante's heard that he's still working on how to get beyond the ego. He's heard that another way to do that is through giving oneself up to the influence of a higher being, to giving oneself up to the spiritual influence of a Buddha or a Bodhisattva. And that he decides for this reason to ask one of his teachers for an initiation into a visualization of a Bodhisattva. And he meets Chetrul Sangye Dorje, who I think he's been recommended to as a great yogi and a great teacher. And he meets him and he feels immediately feels a lot of faith in him, and asks Chetrul Sangye Dorje to choose for him what Bodhisattva figure he would meditate upon. And so again, he's letting go of his own desires or wills, or I was thinking maybe he would have taken up Padmasambhava, I don't know, but what he does is he asks Chetrul Sangye Dorje who he thinks should be his Yedam, and the Rinpoche says Green Tara. So Green Tara, he immediately gives Bhante the Green Tara visualization sadhana practice, and Bhante goes on to do that visualization practice, which is a self-visualization of oneself as Green Tara, for 7 years every day. So you're just thinking of Bhante doing that. He's visualizing himself as a beautiful female, graceful figure of compassion and kindness, and he does say it sort of slightly in his text, and I think I did become gradually kinder and more compassionate through this. But he's opening up. He's opening up to being that being of compassion and kindness, which is what we do with those practices. So he's searching in a way to give up his will in a very definite way, let the Bodhisattva's influence permeate him and shine out through him. And of course, those are the practices we take on at ordination in Triratna. And very often people do choose their own Bodhisattva practices or Buddha practices, but you can ask your preceptor to choose for you as well. Sometimes it's like a more collaborative thing. But I wanted to say a little bit more about Dada Rinpoche in particular, Bhante's relationship, his friendship with Dada Rinpoche. Dada Rinpoche was the Tibetan teacher Bhante got to know earliest and best, really. And they became friends and often worked together to help bring together the different sects into Kalimpong. The different Buddhist traditions were often quite competitive or maybe went different ways. So they met when Bhante was 27 and Dado was 34. And Bhante says they spoke in Hindi mixed with bits of English, Tibetan and Sanskrit, plus an intuitive telepathic element. So you get a little bit of a sense of they work together quite a bit. They spent quite a bit of time together. And he says with that combination, they could and they did talk about anything, and a real friendship developed. And as we know, Bhante came to revere Dado Rinpoche as the living Bodhisattva, perfect in his mindfulness and his practice of the 6 paramitas. And he eventually asked Dado Rinpoche, just before he returned to Britain actually, to confer on him the Bodhisattva ordination, which he received in 1962. And I thought I'd just read a couple of things that Bhante said about Dado Rinpoche. He said, I've certainly met many people who are good and kind and spiritually minded and helpful, and there are perhaps 10 or 12 who might be bodhisattvas. But there was only one about whom I was absolutely certain from my personal experience, and that was Dado Rinpoche. It was from him that I took my own bodhisattva ordination, and it was partly for this reason that I took it from him. The others might have been, and in many respects certainly were, very good in their behaviour and attitude. I'm not saying they were not, but I was absolutely convinced from my personal observation of his behaviour from day to day over a period of many years, and from seeing him in all sorts of situations, that he was a bodhisattva. But I could not feel that conviction about anybody else. But then he goes on to say, but one bodhisattva is enough. And someone says, in what sense, what do you mean by that? What does it mean one bodhisattva is enough? And Bhante says, well, I mean it subjectively. It convinces you that such things as bodhisattvas are possible. You only have to find one, like some rare variety of flower that you may have heard of, but you go botanizing and you actually find a specimen. Even though you only find one specimen, you know the whole species exists. That's just wonderful, isn't it? And he goes on to say, I haven't really got time to say much more about that, but just the way he was running a school for the refugee children, everything he did, he was always the same, always mindful. Yeah. He said, seeing him was always quite inspiring and sort of galvanizing. He was always positive, and this was quite remarkable. So, Bhante had the experience of someone he really knew in his heart was a bodhisattva, and that was, he says also in that, this is that sort of question and answer thingy in the Bodhisattva. It might be in this book actually, I'm not sure. Guide to the Bodhisattva Ideal. That it rubs off on you. Something rubs off on you. That's what the spark or something rubs off. Okay. So I've just got a little bit more to say, which is, I'm sorry it's a bit too long, this talk. No, it's not. It should be 20 minutes. So I think, anyway, yeah. But I think it's pretty clear that Bhante didn't start the movement, the Friends of the Western Buddhist Order or Triratna for himself. I suppose maybe that's just quite something to think about, isn't it? Or because he really wanted to, in a way. He has said that, he was actually he really enjoyed his life in Kalimpong. He was very, very happy doing he was doing writing, and he was, with the different Tibetan teachers that he had. He knew everybody in his local community just about his as a local figure in Kalimpong. He said if anything he would have enjoyed maybe a monastic life. But once he returned to England and saw the state of Buddhism, and he just knew a new Buddhist movement was needed, and so he knew that was what he was going to do. It's as though something else was coming through him. I wanted to mention, I went to a talk in 1990. Bhante was reading a paper called My Relation to the Order, which was really a moving paper. I think it was sparked off by the fact that he was in the process of handing on his responsibilities as a preceptor to various senior order members. And he wanted to make it plain to us that he felt no differently towards those who had been ordained by those senior order members than those he had ordained himself. I thought it was very kind, actually. He made it very, very explicit that he felt absolutely same about those people. They were no less important to him, and he emphasized how important to him each order member was, how he followed people's lives through the Shabda, the order newsletter, and with great interest. And he also said he felt his relationship to the order to be that not of a guru, not even of a teacher, but of a friend. So it was a very intimate talk, actually, very, very moving. In the talk, he also said he didn't feel he was the ideal person to start a Buddhist movement. He didn't have the right qualities. And he said he was glad that his disciples and preceptees were different to him as well. They had different qualities and different characters. He didn't want the Friends of the Western Buddhist Order to be a Triratna, to be Sangharakshita writ large, he said. And the more difference there was, the more we will be able to reach out to different people, different cultures, and the diversity would be there. And at the end of the talk, Bhante made this statement, which very mysterious statement. He said, "Not long ago, I spoke of my having taken upon myself the onerous responsibility of founding the Western Buddhist Order. I indeed took that responsibility upon myself, and it was indeed an onerous one. Nonetheless, there are times when, far from feeling it was I who took on the responsibility, I felt that it was the responsibility that took on me. There are times when I am dimly aware of a vast overshadowing consciousness that has, through me, founded the order and set in motion our whole movement." And he sort of moved on to other topics, like that was one thing, and then he's going to say something else. And I was thinking, gosh, what have I heard, and what are its implications? And then in Super Personal Force paper that we've been looking at, Subhuti shared with us something similar, doesn't he? He shares of a time when he was receiving dictation for Bhante. He was writing a letter for him to somebody, and Bhante in that letter writes, I may also say that in recent years, on looking back over the history of the Friends of the Western Buddhist Order, Triratna, I have been amazed at what has been accomplished. At the same time, I have felt, or rather seen very clearly, that this has not been accomplished just by me. It's as though a supra-personal energy or force was working through me, an energy or force for which, in a way, I was not responsible. And Bhante goes on to share a poem he's written called The Wind, an amazing poem, which I thought I might end with. But Subhuti comments in this that what he sees this as suggesting is that the Triratna community has emerged from have not emerged from any egoistic or self-interested motive. It embodies the Dharma rather than any personal desire, which is an amazing and wonderful thought. But I just think, well, it isn't so far from my experience of Triratna nowadays, actually. I don't think the way Triratna is working its way in the world it's not because of anybody's personal desire or motivation. It really doesn't sort of come across that way. I don't think it's possible to create a collective like this from an egoistic motivation, a collective of people who are practicing generosity, ethics, patience, energy, meditation, and wisdom. You aren't going to get people coming together to do that from an egoistic motivation. Yes. And just the history of what's been happening within Triratna over the decades, we see people giving of themselves over and over again, sharing their time, their energy, their money, their inspiration, their knowledge, their love, to create contexts to help others find the Dharma. Even creating contexts within their own home situations in their businesses. We've been here at Aurya Drishti was talking about sharing with her. Well, they don't really know that she's trying to practice Sangha Vastus within her water company. I'm sure different people have got different stories of what they're trying to do in their own environments. And of all this retreat centre here, this Dharmadhara, is one of the very latest flowering of that culture here in the world. A flowering of culture of generosity and hard work. It's obviously the product of much inspiration and selfless hard work. We've sort of seen it ourselves, haven't we, in coming here. It's very, very amazing. So I suppose our task in the spiritual life is like Bhante's as a young man, is to find ways to sort of get out of our own way, isn't it? To go beyond our egoistic motivations, say that this some sort of spirit, altruistic bodhisattva spirit, can flow through us, so we can actually be of service to the world without getting too much in the way. We are going to get a bit in the way, aren't we? But the practice is to get less and less in the way as time goes on, and let the bodhisattva spirit flow through us so that we can be increasingly of benefit to the world. So I thought I'd end with that beautiful poem, mysterious poem of Bhante's called The Wind. A wind was in my sails. It blew stronger and fiercer hour by hour. I did not know from whence it came, or why. I only knew its power. Sometimes it dashed me on the rocks. Sometimes it spun me round and round. Sometimes I laughed aloud for joy. Sometimes I felt a peace profound. It drove me on, that manic wind, when I was young. It drives me still, now I am old. It lives in me. Its breath, my breath. Its will, my will.
We hope you enjoyed this week's podcast. Please help us keep this free. Make a contribution at freebuddhistaudio.com/donate. And thank you